So I'm here with Katy Thomas, advocate and a mother of a disabled person. Welcome to the show, Katy. It's good to see you.
Oh, kia ora, Blake. It's wonderful to be here.
So how have you been?
Tired, very tired. Fireworks and nocturnal epilepsy don't famously play well together. So the past couple of weeks have been challenging.
Let's talk about that first then. How does the how do different changes in the atmosphere and events around it change the diagnosis for your child?
Well, I guess the diagnosis is omnipresent. Yet the symptom presentation changes, largely to do with whether or not his seizure threshold is breached, and being a nocturnal epileptic, so his seizures happen exclusively at night. When you have loud explosions and fireworks landing in your front yard, it's very easy to rouse him. And the seizures typically happen with an abrupt transition between deep and light sleep. And if the transition is smooth, then he should stay asleep. If it is not smooth or he is woken abruptly, then there's a high chance that he will wake and seize. And there's not really too much that I can do around that. There's only so much sedation you can give before it becomes
too much. Yeah,
exactly. So the best thing that I did was get out of Auckland 2 weekends ago. It was the first night of the fireworks, and I was like, absolutely not, we're getting out of here. And I really wish I hadn't come back, because every night that I've been here, I'm like, oh, surely there won't be any tonight. It's way past Guy Fawkes, but I stand corrected.
Yeah. So you've been very outspoken about the cut this year with your connections in the media and so on and so forth. So how's it gotten worse since the last time we saw you on the internet, mainly like BHN and New Zealand Herald and stuff like that?
Wow. Well, I guess the last run-in, it's kind of sad that it's this ongoing fight, really. Like, it would be really nice to not be consistently butting heads. The last interaction I had with our fund provider, although it kind of resolved well, only after it was escalated to management. At the time, I was trying to claim a subscription for this type of auricular vagal nerve stimulation that Edward's been using for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Non-invasive, non-surgical.
Yeah.
And I was trying to claim 1 month. And when the funds were being processed, the accounts people came back to me and said, oh, so we've halved that because you can't claim a 12-month subscription when you've only had 6 months into your funding, so we've halved it. I replied back saying that was only 1 month. So here's 6 months of invoices. I was only claiming a couple $100, and now you owe me $1,500. I was so cross, because we'd only been out of hospital a few days. The behavior was a lot. The pain was a lot. And I was like, here is this thing that we know works, has been signed off by his needs assessor. It's been claimed for in previous funding periods. And they're like, well, we're not sure about that. So now you need to fill out a purchasing form. And it just made me very, very cross that there was this additional burden, an administrative burden of labor passed back to me, when actually the onus was on them to go and check his individualized plan, see what had been approved, what was not approved. And all of it just kind of came down to lack of reading and lack of detail on their part. I knew that it was an appropriate use of the funds. I knew that it had already been approved. And it really frustrated me because it wasn't just this, it's kind of now every time I'm submitting timesheets, every time I'm submitting expense claims for, there is always a pushback, there is always an attempt to reduce it. And further to that effect, the language that they used I found was really problematic, that we are here to keep your funds safe. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's actually your job. You're not meant to retain funds. You are meant to disperse them for the benefit of the disabled person who is being supported. And over and above that, they didn't use their names, so there was a lack of accountability from the service provider and their manager who they leveled up to. And yeah, there was just a lot of things where there seemed to be an amount of hypocrisy. So they were allowed to reduce the claim by saying, oh, we're only going to pay you 6 months. When I actually tried to claim 6 months, they said, oh, we're only going to pay you half of that because it falls outside the 90-day period. So it seems like we'll just manipulate the rules to minimize the amount of support the disabled person receives.
Are you still having issues with because I was watching your previous interviews back getting ready for this, are you still having issues with people accusing you of invoices being out of date and stuff like that?
Yeah, it literally is the same thing, and it's just a different type of invoicing, and it's a different type of that it really feels very petty, and it feels very undignified. There is a real lack of trust, and to me, it seems like there's a real move towards infantilization, as if both disabled people and their primary caregivers are incompetent or incapable of managing themselves and their budget, when actually we do an incredible job of doing a lot with below the bare minimum of what we can subsist on. And the idea that we're bringing less to the table than we are. The majority of primary caregivers that I know have learnt on the job, and have years and years of experience of giving the best possible life to the disabled person that we love and work with. And we're also bringing skill sets from our lives that we had before this became our main role. So it's not as if we actually are children with no lived experience. A lot of us are coming with accounting and finance and fund management and, a wealth of maybe healthcare experience, or, it's not as if we're starting from scratch. It's like, well, I'm not doing my career anymore. This is my 24/7 role. And I'm also leaning on everything that I had previous to ensure that my care is the best possible care that I can be giving. And
Yeah.
I would really love to see a shift in the dynamic between state and the disabled people and or their primary caregivers, because we know what we're doing. We actually just need permission and time to go about doing it. We don't need the additional labours because we already work a lot more than most people give us credit for anyway. Yeah.
Well, I guess for me, because my family were in the same boat, but and I still live with my family, but I got to a point where they set me up so that as soon as I was old enough, I could start advocating for myself, and that's when I started to do stuff like this more recently. So uh, for you being on the opposite side of that, do you feel like the same as me? Like we shouldn't give up, even though it feels like we're not getting anywhere.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course, we can't give up. Look, governments come and go. This is life for us. I think caregiving and disability, it's not like you are going to grow out of it or I am going to walk off the job one day.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a little bit of a zoom out and perhaps a little bit of tempered patience, because things are extremely difficult right now. I absolutely do not want to detract from the marginalisation and the really punitive changes that have been made since March 18 and continue to be made. However, it's also really critical that we view this with a lens of finiteness. Like it's not going to be like this forever. It is very difficult for us. It is very difficult for a lot of people. I think most New Zealanders, there's a very small minority that is benefiting a lot from this, but actually the vast majority is struggling, probably not as much as we are. However, I do feel that we can use this time to scope out what we imagine to be a better Horizon 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because although the cuts since March 18 have been harsh and very restrictive, I don't really know that pre-March 18 things were perfect. Certainly for me, they were not. I was still banking on there being some type of accessibility legislation, but a much more robust form than was drafted and presented the year previous. I still feel there is a long way to go with oars in education. That criteria definitely needs to be expanded. And then over and above that, there are a few things that I think need a lot of working. I think up until the age of 5, there are some really good supports provided by Ministry of Health that are stripped away once children are presumed to enter the education system, and MOE is meant to be dispersing all of these supports. But the reality is, unless you're entering with oars or you receive it within the first 3 years, that downhill trajectory is quite marked, and it really sets up for some long-term problems that would be much easier resolved with earlier intervention. I think that one benefit from the March 18 cuts, and that has been a marked move towards collaboration and unity within community in a way that I haven't seen. I've been in the disability advocacy space, for more than a decade now, and particularly more so in the last 7 years. And every public meeting that I've been to, there has really been this felt sense that we're all on the same page. It's no longer the scarcity mentality where, oh, if they get that, then we won't have, and our needs are greater than your needs in this area. It's really been a much more bipartisan approach that we're all in this together. Every single one of us has a vested interest in all of our rights being upheld. And I think that's something for us to build on.
Do you feel angry when you hear the ministers sound bites on the news or in Parliament keeping denying that there's no cut, there's no freezes with people like you and I, and our different roles are clearly impacted by it? Does it make you frustrated still?
Of course. Anytime somebody bald-faced lies, it's going to make me livid. But I also think that people are very tired of the lies. I really think we've come to the point where people are no longer buying the BS. And they can maintain that party line, and there will always be that portion of people who would much rather accept the lie than peel back the layers and do the work to discover the truth and find a pathway forward. Because anytime you are talking about a redistribution of power, it means that the haves will have to give some to the have-nots, and there will always be those greedy little goblins who just want to hoard everything for themselves. But I don't think they are the majority of the public. I really, truly do not believe that. And also, it's been surfaced in data now. CPAG have done some really great research into this space, and we know that we have like 3/4 of the population who are just devastated that, the current government is actually instituting poverty and creating hardship for people who are the furthest from power. So it's really important for us to maintain that hope and to keep pushing forward with with a really clear vision of how we expect society to treat us, how we expect to be included, and what is necessary from a legislative perspective to make that happen.
Have you been able to talk to any opposition parties or anyone from your local council that's been of assistance to you?
Not yet. There was an opportunity that they kind of backed out of not too long ago, with one of our carers presenting a petition to Parliament that was meant to be met by Whaikaha, and yeah, we got a bit excited about that, and then they all pulled out. So no, that hasn't eventuated yet. And I still think there is a bit of scope there,
Yeah.
and a bit of organising as well, being a little bit more strategic about who, what, when, where, and how. And also, I think we need to be really cautious about how we're using our energy, because for us in particular, we are operating on a less than full bucket.
Yeah.
And we actually don't need to persuade everyone that we deserve dignity and for our human rights to be respected. And so, within that, how many of those conversations are going to deplete or nourish us, I think, is something that needs to be approached carefully. It's the same reason why I sort of pushed back on a protest movement that was floated a while ago, because I thought, from my perspective, just being completely practical about it, the idea of hundreds or thousands of immunocompromised whānau and their financially constrained caregivers and support workers marching together in the middle of winter seemed just like an appalling idea, particularly for the purpose of parading to a government who just doesn't care about protests. It's not going to move the dial. It is not going to elevate the cause or bring about meaningful change. And I think there's a little bit of mahi for us to do there. Like, what is going to be the most meaningful, useful way for us to work in this space between now and a change of government?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of unpacking to do there.
I mean, I can relate to the protest thing because I was approached by members of the opposition in my advocate capacity saying, "Oh, is this something you think getting advice, something you think we should do?" And I said, well, not in the middle of winter, your heart's in the right place. Great idea, but not in the middle of winter. You're much better off doing it indoor meetings and doing it that way where people are warm and dry and all that kind of stuff. So, their heart's in the right place. That's
Yeah,
all.
and it's yeah, exactly. It as an idea, the sentiment is good, but we do have to be really practical, and making sure that our resistance is accessible, and making sure that our resistance is representative of who we are and what capacity we really have. And I think that in those spaces, potentially that's a place for our allies to be stepping up, and that's a place for allies to be demonstrating their allegiance to the cause in ways that will not cost them as much as it might cost us.
couple more questions for you. So, what's your? We're trying to get the minister to appear on this program. So, what's your message for her to encourage her to appear on this program?
My message to her is, as the Minister for Disabled People and also Social Development, there is an expectation that you are here to advocate for us, not against us. And throwing us under the bus, casting aspersions, and making false claims dilutes your credibility. And it dilutes our ability to work with you, both in this government and in future governments. And we know that governments are temporary. Our life is long. I'm going to be in this role for the next 40 years, and you will not be. So my message to her is, if you want to retain any modicum of credibility beyond this term in Parliament, think about what you want to be remembered for. Because so far, this government has delivered the cruelest blows to the people the furthest from power in decades. And I'm not sure that's the legacy that any lady wants to leave behind for her grandchildren.
Very well said. So, as we finish, what are your hopes for the future? What do you hope that the government realise?
My hopes for the government would be for them to have the grace to do an about face.
Yeah.
It's always embarrassing to go back on your word, but it is far worse to keep digging into a hole until you are so far down that nobody has the time or energy to help you climb back out. And that's really where we're seeing the treatment of disabled people since this government has come to power, particularly since March 18. And there is still scope. There is still time. There is still the capability to turn the ship around and start producing results for an impoverished and under-resourced community who will never stop being as vulnerable as they are, but they can absolutely have a better life with a government that supports and recognises their needs. We could still see a bill brought before Parliament, a really exciting piece of accessibility legislation that could be a legacy, that could be something that this government could reflect on and say, well, we did that. We did some terrible things first, but we learnt our lesson and we still went out on a high note. We could see a lot of good done if they had the gumption to do so.
The final point that I would make myself and for this interview is that I don't hold much hope, because after all, they were the ones that brought in EGL, and look what happened. They took it away. So I don't hold much hope. But we can hope. Is all I
We
would
can
say.
hope. We must hope. And, I also want to say that I've worked with opposition before. I spoke in Health Select Committee to primarily opposition members of Parliament who are now the Minister of Health and the Minister of Mental Health. And fundamentally, I truly do believe that politicians and members of Parliament do want to serve the people. And sometimes, or often, they forget their way, and they can be reminded of their purpose, and they can be brought back to their why. And I still hang on to a slither of hope that they will see that the groundswell support is not in their favour at the moment, and they can try and push through as many things as they want, and it will simply be reversed.
Well, Katie, I asked you to wait there, but to the viewers, I'll say thank you for listening to today's episode, and we will see you on the next one.